This is the Celestial Revenant. The idea of this build is to have a more mobile playstyle with using the Shiro stance, but also having a little bit more sustain. So when you play a power Herald, you're pretty much forced to go into a Zerker kind of playstyle where you're very squishy, you can't really survive outnumbered for any duration of time. So for roaming, where you're going to be outnumbered very often, it's not very good. So the idea is to have the sort of playstyle of a power Revenant where you have a lot of burst, but you also have decent amount of sustain to survive those outnumbered situations. And the burst is going to come from conditions and power damage. So this is a hybrid build using the Celestial stats. And you'll get most of your damage from weapon swapping. So the idea of the build is that weapons sigils will proc whenever your legends swap. So for example, I'm in a Hydromancy and Cleansing sigil on my sword. Now when I swap legends, it procs the Hydromancy and Cleansing sigil. Then when I swap to my other weapon set, it will proc the Mace axe, which is Doom Geo. Then my legend swap is on cooldown for 9 seconds because I just swapped legends, and the ICD of all the swap sigils is 9 seconds as well. So you can time it that you can get 4 swap sigils to proc at the same time if you swap legends first and then swap your weapon right after, because you're proccing the same weapon that you're on twice before swapping to another one. And the idea is to basically get Doom, Geo, Hydro, and then a little bit of cleansing as well. So it's not fully aggressive, the swaps, but it's really nice for Cleansing Sigil, right? Because you get cleanse every single swap if you swap legend before you swap your weapon. And obviously there's going to be situations where you don't do that, but in an ideal, situation, you will be doing the legend into weapon swap rotation. And this gives you a lot of damage because Doom Sigil and Hydro Sigil are very big damage. The Geo Sigil will also do pretty good damage too, but the traits of this build allow a lot of burst on top of that. So in Corruption, you'll be taking Acolyte of Torment. It just gives you a little bit more damage on Torment. The other things you're not going to be taking because this isn't a demon stance build. You will get Abyssal Chill, which gives you Torment on Chill. So you've got a lot of chills in this build, and a lot of those chills also are CCs. So you can be debilitating your opponent while also dealing damage. And that sort of bypasses the balance philosophy that we've gone for in the past patches, where CCs should do no damage, because CCs or things that chill people will be doing damage now. So it's really good, and chill is obviously a strong condition, so I'm interpreting it as a CC. But you also have a little bit of damage modifiers on conditions here and there in Corruption, and you also have Diabolic Inferno. So Diabolic Inferno gives you poison and burning whenever you invoke Torment, which is basically whenever you legend swap. And as we know, legend swapping gives you your swap sigils, so that'll give you damage around you, and Diabolic Inferno will just add more conditions and more damage on top of that. So it's adding, we're going to be adding a lot of burst to a short amount of time with these kind of effects. So Invocation, whenever you swap legend, you're going to remove a condition. That's pretty important. You're also going to have a lot of Fury synergy on this build. So you deal increased damage and condition damage to targets while you have Fury. And because this is a hybrid build with the Celestial Amulet, you're going to make use of both of the condition damage and power damage of the Fury modifier here. So that's very good for the archetype. Also, on the same vein, is Incense Response. Whenever you gain Fury, you'll gain 5 might for 8 seconds. And this is a really strong trait, so strong that it's been nerfed to 2 might in PvP, but it's unnerfed in World vs. World. And might is a hybrid boon. So it gives you condition damage and power damage. So it's just feeding more into that hybrid playstyle with the Celestial Amulet. And how Celestial kind of works is that it's actually not a lot of damage because you're spreading the stats out so evenly, but because you can get so much might, because you're getting Fury very often with this build, you have the Facet of Darkness, which will give you Fury pulsing. You can get up to 25 might pretty easily. You also get Fury whenever you swap Legend and whenever you disable a foe. So yeah, it's very possible to stack your might up very high and get a lot of burst damage. Also, you have Song of the Mists. Song of the Mist gives you a skill effect whenever you swap legends based on the legend you're swapping into. So in Shiro, swapping into Shiro, you'll get quickness and vulnerability. Now vulnerability is also a hybrid condition because it increases your damage and your condition damage. So you're getting a lot of modifiers at this point, as you can see, for both your damage and your condition damage. So even though maybe your conditions aren't doing that much damage or your power isn't doing that much damage, you combine them together and they do a lot of burst. But yeah, in general, you just want the vulnerability. It's a cover condition and more damage. And then in Glint, whenever you swap into Glint, you'll get Burning, which is more damage, right? So right now you have Diabolic Inferno, 4 seconds, and then you have Call of the Dragon, which is another like 3-second burn. So you've got like 2 burn on going into your Legend swap into Glint. And then you also have Chill, which will give Torment. So as you can see, you've got tons of conditions just by swapping your Legends swap, because that'll do your weapons as well. So this build just gets tons of damage with no animation to it, essentially. There is a little bit of a delay on the Invoke Torment part, which is the Diabolic Inferno, and it can kind of make it so that there's a tell to your burst, but you often will want to do this when you have CCs on the target. So it is still pretty strong, even though it can be telegraphed, and it's happening every 9 seconds. So you can bait cooldowns, bait dodges, and then go for it, because people know that your swap is coming when they play around you, and you'll see later in some duels when people are expecting you to swap as soon as you get in melee range. You can often bait dodges and bait cooldowns just with your presence because they're afraid of getting swapped on, but you don't necessarily have to swap. So there's a lot of presence that this build has just from existing. Then lastly, in Herald, you get Rising Momentum. Whenever you use an upkeep skill, you'll gain movement speed. This is really good for the Shiro Impossible Odds because when you use that, you move really quickly. And it allows you to survive just through movement because the build doesn't have that much evasion in it. It's more about kind of like sustain, and to avoid damage, you're mostly using Rising Momentum to move out of it. Then you have Hardening Persistence. This is going to give you a little bit of damage reduction along the same lines that I was talking before about how you want sustain because you don't have that much evasion in this build. So your upkeep skills will not only give you movement speed, but you'll also gain damage reduction, and your shield skills will cleanse conditions. So your 5 skill will pulse 4 condition cleanse, and your 4 skill will cleanse 1 condition, and it can also cleanse for your allies. Lastly, you have Draconic Echo. Your facet passives will affect additional targets, which means you have the ability to support your allies if you're in like a Zerg situation with boon uptime. But also, your facet passives will remain for 5 seconds or 6 seconds after you've consumed the active. So what this means is you can use your protection elite and get the effect of the super speed or the knockback, and then still pulls protection on yourself afterwards. So you can sort of get very aggressive with your facet actives, but also still gain the boons from them. And that's really important because your Facet of Darkness will keep giving you Fury, which will give you damage. You get about 60% crit chance with Fury, so it adds up. And also, when you're gaining Fury, you're gaining Might. So you want to be able to use your Facet actives when you want to use them and still gain the benefits of them. And obviously, you want to be gaining Swiftness as well, and Regen as much as you can, because those are important boons to have on you pretty much always. The equipment I go for is full Celestial on my Trinkets and my armor. Then on my weapons, I go for Celestial on the sword and shield, and then I go for Vipers on the mace and axe. And the reason I go mace axe with Vipers is because it's mostly the damage set. And I use the sword shield mostly for kiting, but the mace axe is for like landing my big damage combos. And also condition durations that are applied when the condition lands will still carry through when your stats change afterwards. So when I apply a lot of my conditions with the mace and the axe, I can still swap to my sword shield, and those conditions will have the same duration. It's not really that big of a deal. You can just go full Celestial, but I feel that that's a little bit better for the role of each weapon. I also have Antitoxin runes, so this will give you more condition damage. This build, though it's hybrid, it leans more into a condition damage kind of orientation, even though the playstyle is very power oriented, but the damage actually comes a lot from the conditions. But I use the Rune of Antitoxin mostly because it gives you an additional Condi cleanse every time you cleanse a condition. So in the build I have 1 Condi cleanse every time I swap legends, so I'll gain 2. I have 1 Condi cleanse on shield skills, so my shield 5 will pulse 2 condition cleanse instead of 1 for 4 ticks. And then obviously my shield 4 will cleanse one condition to allies and 2 for myself. And then I also have a cleansing sigil, which will cleanse 4. So every time I swap legends, if I do the rotation correctly, I will gain a 4 Condi cleanse from the cleansing sigil, and then another 2 from the invocation trait. So that's 6 Condi cleanse every weapon swap rotation if you perform it correctly. So that's pretty strong. And I also have Hydro cleansing, right? We talked about cleansing just now, but the Hydro sigil is going to give a very high power burst while also giving the chill, which gives torment. And then on your mace, you have Doom and Geo. So Doom, Geo are the highest damaging conditions you can get, and there is Sigil of Torment, and that procs on crit, but it's not really the same as your swap sigils, because it has a chance to not proc, right? If you hit someone, you have to hit them first of all, and then you have to crit, and that doesn't really fit into your very tight rotation as much, because you want to be proccing it off cooldown, and if you don't crit or if you don't even hit, then it's not proccing. So Doom Geo is a little bit more damage. You can even go energy instead of Doom if you're Zerging, because Doom is very single target and it won't be that effective in Zergs. So you can go energy for a little bit more survivability, but I do feel that the damage really drops far if you're not using Doom Geo. So that's why I use that. And yeah, that's pretty much the equipment. For food, I use the spherified peppercorn spiced oyster soup, and that just gives you celestial stats with damage reduction, which is good for this build because you suffer from a lot of physical damage because you don't have a lot of evasion. And for the enhancement, I'll just use any kind of like condition damage tuning crystal, or you can use the potion of Karka toughness, which gives you 150 toughness, but that's a little bit difficult to get because you have to get that from South Sun Cove during the Karka Queen event. The skills you will be using on the Mace Axe are Searing Fissure. This puts down a burning effect in front of you and will pulse burns. The first pulse is a longer burn duration. This is really good for cleaving downstate bodies or on players who've been CC'd. Also, you have Echoing Eruption. This is a leap attack that has a blast combo finisher on the impact location, and then it will send out a bolt or like eruption, and that'll deal 4 torment and 3 seconds of weakness. It's a really strong skill, and it also has pretty good power coefficient to it, which is nice because this is basically seen as a Condi weapon, but it also has really good power coefficients, so it works very well in the hybrid Celestial build. Then you also have Frigid Blitz. This is a long range, 900, unblockable port to the target if the axe skill lands, and it'll deal really good damage, as you can see, even for a non full power build. Then it'll chill and slow the target, which means it'll also torment. So this is a really good engage skill. You'll often begin with this if you don't have your Shiro stance up. So Temporal Rift is the final skill on the axe. It will put down a rift and it pulls enemies in towards the middle of the rift, so it allows you to land your Searing Fissure very neatly on all of them when it pulls them into it. So it's pretty nice synergy with the mace. And in general, what you're going to be doing with this build is you'll do your weapon swaps into a Searing Fissure, and then you'll use Echoing Eruption. Then you'll wait a little bit, maybe until your next swaps are up, and then you'll use your Frigid Blitz, or you'll use Temporal Rift to set up your Frigid Blitz, and then you'll swap into it like this. So you'll do that, and then Legend and your weapon swap, and then you have Sword. So in Sword, you're going to immediately use your Chilling Isolation. This is a power coefficient skill that does chill on both hits. So it's going to give 2 stacks of Torment in an AoE, and it's also a combo finisher whirl. And this works really well with the Mace because you can put down your Echoing Eruption and then swap, use your Sword too, and you've got a ton of burning stacks from the whirl finisher in the burn field. So it's really good to use those 2 skills around your swaps because it adds a lot more to the burst. You have Unrelenting Assault. This gives you might every time it hits. It's an evade frame, and you basically just port around and hit multiple targets. It's really good for singling out targets, but mostly just for chasing or using the evade. It's kind of a power coefficient skill, but you have the Shield 4 skill, which will heal and give protection to allies that it passes through. It will only heal on the location that it hits, so you have to put it on yourself, or you have to run into the location, but it will always give protection to allies that it passes through. It also gives you a condition cleanse, so it gives you 2 Condi cleanse, but it'll give 1 condition cleanse to an ally. It's also saying that it's unblockable, but I guess that's just so that the projectile can't be reflected in, so you can actually heal with it. Crystal Hibernation is a 3-second duration block where you can't move, so it leaves you kind of vulnerable. You have to be careful where you use it, but it does heal you quite a bit and gives you condition cleanse, and it adds a lot to the build because of the flow of the build, because you're basically waiting for those swap bursts, and having a 3-second block allows you to buy time for those big momentum shifts when you swap Legend. So that's pretty much the weapons. For your Legends skills, you have the Glint stance. Your heal skill gives you regen, so it's nice to have this up because it gives you a lot of sustain, but when you activate the facet, it will heal you for a little bit and then invert all incoming damage to healing, and that's really good for outnumbered situations because the more people hitting you, the more you'll heal. And you want to use this aggressively as well, because while you are basically invulnerable to attacks, you can also keep attacking. So it prevents any counter pressure from happening to you. CCs will counter this skill though, because they don't have to damage you while you're CC'd. Then you have Facet of Darkness. This just pulses Fury, really nice for giving you might uptime. And when you activate it, it's a stun break that blinds cover condies and it puts 10 vulnerability, more cover condies, and will reveal targets within a 600 range. And it's a stun break, so it's just a really good skill. A lot of people like to spam this because it's so rewarding, but you do want to save it for the right situation, because even though you have Draconic Echo, you don't want to just waste your Fury uptime. So next is Facet of Strength. I just throw this out because the might uptime is kind of free when you have Draconic Echo, so you just throw that out. It does a little bit of power damage, but it's not amazing, right? It's not amazing. You can just throw it like the passive in there if you want to just get more of the rising momentum stacks, but otherwise, yeah, it's not too useful. Facet of Elements though is very strong. It is an AoE on the targeted location, and it will pulse 3 times. The first one is Weakness, the second one is Chill, which means it'll give Torment, and the third one is a triple burn stack. So it does a lot of damage if you can CC people in this. And finally you have Facet of Chaos. This gives protection, very strong boon, and that will also allow you to cast Facet, or the Chaotic Release, which is a very strong skill because it's a dragon attack in front of you, and you can stow it, right? Because for whatever reason they thought that would be interactive, and it gives this huge tell that you can stow. Obviously it's still costing you some upkeep, but yeah, if you do land it, it's a massive knockback, and you can land a lot of CC and a lot of your burst combos into this skill. So enemies always pretty much dodge this, so even if you don't land it, you can just use your burst right after, because they've used the dodge to avoid the CC that would land your burst anyways. So it's just such a high impact skill no matter what, and yeah, it's just really good. Next is the Shiro stance. So your heal skill gives you a little bit of healing, but whenever you hit targets, you'll siphon life from them, and that's really good for this build because you want to be in combat constantly. You're not really going to be wanting to leave combat too often, so it's important that you get value off of this by maintaining aggressive playstyle, and it can give you quite a bit of damage as well for a heal skill. So it is very aggressive heal skill. Next is Riposting Shadows. This will give you Fury, which is really good because that gives you might, and it will dodge you backwards while breaking stun and remove the movement inhibiting conditions from you, which if it does, it will proc your Antitoxin runes and remove another condition. So it can often be a pretty good condi clear, but in general it is 40 energy, so you don't want to use it too much. Next is Phase Traversal. This gives you a port to the target, and when you port you will get quickness and 2 stacks of unblockable, which isn't really that important, but when you do port into the target, it allows you to do your swap. So you can do port in 2 and then 2 and then swap. So it's pretty good for getting in range to do a lot of your damage. And then next is Impossible Odds. This is kind of not that good. Like, it's better for power builds. This has a lot of power damage still, but not as much as you'd think, and it's mostly used for the movement speed in this build to stay on top of the target so that you can land your swaps. It is pretty energy intensive, but if, say, you're about to leave Shiro stance and you have excess energy, you can always just use Shiro and then immediately swap, and it gives you a little bit of that movement speed that's basically for free. Lastly is Jade Winds. Gives vulnerability, which we know is a really good condition for hybrid builds, and a 3-second stun with a very wide radius. So if you land that on someone, then you can land a lot of your bursts as well on top, and it's just really good and high impact because they have to dodge that as well. Both of your elite skills have to be dodged. So yeah, those are pretty much the skills. In this clip, I am attacking a camp filled with siege. There's a bunch of role players in here who will defend this camp to the very last inch of their lives. So as such, they will do everything in their power to kill me, which means outnumbering me heavily. So I use terrain very strategically here to survive and fill the gap in between my burst combos. I land a really nice burst combo there on the core Ellie, but now I'm being attacked by a ranger. So I go into my shield to block, I line of sight a little bit and wait for my swap to come up, and then I swap to cleave out the Ellie. At this point, every time you get a kill, you need to resustain and then reassess the situation for whether you want to get the next kill or you want to leave. Obviously, I get another kill on the ranger by doing my swap burst, but I'm kiting around because I have some NPCs on me and I wasn't really sure that I had enough cooldowns to cleave. So they do get the res on the ranger, but I have more damage and I land a really nice frigid blitz into my swap, and they're low enough that they have to use their heal skill. I port through the wall onto the ranger and I get my final swap off before they go down, but I'm in the middle of the camp. I use my glint heal to invert all the NPC damage while I cleave, and it's not enough to cleave because a ranger can just self-res and I'm getting pressured now by multiple enemies. So I go up onto the roof again to kite, and I just try to sustain by hitting objects. I'm just waiting for cooldowns at this point. My heal skill is coming up in a few seconds, so I'm pretty safe actually. And there's really not any kill that I can see at the moment. So I'm just waiting until I see an opener because my health it's not full yet. So I should be, yeah, I landed nice Jade Winds there, but this is just, this is just like a Tempest right now. I do get a really good amount of damage on it though, and I have my heal skill precasted just in case I get jumped on by a bunch of people. And I do get the Ellie down. I port through the wall and I do a little bit of cleave there. I use a sword 3 to follow the body, but there's NPCs nearby, so I have to block and kite with my my movement speed buff. And yeah, they're gonna get the res. Can't really do much here because the NPCs just give me so much pressure. And at this point, my heal's coming up in 5 seconds and I'm immobilized. This is really bad. And my heal comes up very close to me dying. And at this point, I just have to leave. I use Shiro Stance phase traversal on neutral mob, which is really important to get used to and premeditating. And I get out of that situation. I get out of combat. And at that point, I can just mount if I want to and get out of that outnumbered situation. So in this duel, I'll be 1v1ing a core ranger. And I would say that Revenant probably has the upper hand in this duel because I can kill the pet. However, this ranger actually played really well and they understood how my build worked. So they played around the swaps by getting out of range of me after the, there's been a decent amount of time between my last swap, and just creating distance so that I can't land my damage on them and making it awkward for me because I have to use my swaps out of range to catch up. And if I use my swap out of range to catch up, well then I've used my swap and I didn't get any damage out of it. So this ranger actually played really well, and what they did was they eventually learned that I was killing their pet, and they started microing their pet so that I couldn't damage it, or that it was inconvenient for me to damage it, and that I'd take a lot more damage chasing the pet instead of the ranger. And once I do get the kill on the pet eventually, I've basically removed a lot of the Condi cleanse that they get, a lot of the utility, and a lot of the damage that they get as a core ranger. So it does end up going in my favor. But yeah, one of the very good things to use in this matchup is the Shiro F2, which is a double Condi or a double boon removal, and it's an AoE that's unblockable. So when the ranger's blocking, you want to remove their protection, and you can also use your Axe 4 while they're blocking to stay on top of them. And you want to push the ranger away with your damage, and then once they go away, you focus their pet while they're kiting. And if you get the pet killed, it puts their pet swap cooldown much longer, and then if you kill their second pet after they swap, then they have no pet. And no pet means that not only are they having no counter pressure on you, but they also, the longer cooldown on their pet swap is making it so that they don't get the value from the Condi cleanse, so your damage sticks to them. And they played really well at the end of one of the duels by realizing that I'm going for the pet and making me choose between my life and killing their pet. So I end up having to adapt to that, and instead of killing their final pet, I actually go for the ranger, and it ends up being a really close duel. So well played by this ranger, and this is pretty much the Celestial Revenant. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more of them, and as usual, join my Discord to ask questions.